The explosion rang out like a thunderclap, shaking the metal walls around Marcus. His heart raced as the heat from the blast pushed him forward, throwing him to the ground. He could hear the footsteps of soldiers closing in on him, their boots echoing through the dark hallway of the alien facility. The tension was thick, suffocating, and he knew time was running out. With a swift motion, he rolled over and pressed himself against the cold, metallic floor, clutching his side where a deep gash bled freely. Marcus didn't have much time to think. The soldiers were closing in, and there was no way out. Not unless he acted fast. His mind raced through a million thoughts, but only one plan came to mind. He activated the cloaking device embedded in his suit, making him invisible to their sight. The whir of the cloaking technology hummed quietly in his ears as he carefully moved through the shadows, silent as a ghost. He knew this mission was supposed to be simple. Get in, retrieve the data, and get out. But as the mission had gone terribly wrong, Marcus found himself trapped in the heart of an enemy stronghold, with no backup and no way to escape. He was alone. Just as Marcus began to move toward the exit, he heard it, an unmistakable voice, cold, authoritative, unforgiving. "You humans are nothing but a nuisance," the voice said, slicing through the silence like a blade. "You will regret stepping onto our territory." He froze. The voice was unmistakable. It belonged to her, Zalara, the alien princess who had become notorious for her hatred of humans. It was said she had wiped out entire battalions of soldiers with her advanced technology, and she was not someone to be underestimated. He had heard of her before, but this was the first time they had crossed paths. The princess appeared in the doorway, her presence commanding, her eyes locked on his position. There was a flicker of recognition in her gaze, followed by a sneer. She stepped forward, her regal armor shimmering in the dim light. Marcus knew she was more than just a princess. She was a warrior, and she was about to make him her prisoner. Marcus could feel his pulse pounding in his ears as he stayed perfectly still, praying his cloaking device would keep him hidden. But there was something in the way Zalara moved, something too precise. He had no doubt that she knew exactly where he was. Then, just as he was about to make a break for it, the cloaking device flickered, momentarily revealing his position. In that instant, the princess lunged. Her hand shot out, grabbing his arm with unnatural speed, yanking him from the shadows and throwing him to the cold floor. "You've made a mistake, human," she said, her voice laced with venom. "And now, you will pay for it." Zalara stood over him, her expression a mixture of disdain and amusement. She had the upper hand, and she knew it. Her cold eyes surveyed him as though he were little more than a piece of trash beneath her. Marcus's mind raced. He had to think quickly. But just as he started to gather his thoughts, the ground shook again, this time more violently. The facility seemed to tremble from the inside out. An alarm blared in the distance, and the sounds of chaos echoed through the corridors. Marcus knew that something was happening, something big. A raid, a rescue. Whatever it was his chance. In a split second, Marcus used all his strength to break free from Zalara's grip, forcing himself to his feet. His body screamed in pain, but adrenaline kept him moving. Without thinking, he ran, weaving between the chaotic scene and down another hallway, desperate to escape the princess's clutches. But no sooner had he moved than a force hit him from behind, slamming him to the floor once again. He gasped for breath, feeling the weight of Zalara's presence pressing down on him. "You cannot escape," she said coldly. "I will make sure of it." Marcus' heart pounded in his chest as he looked around. He was out of options. His escape seemed impossible, and his body was quickly losing its strength. Then, the explosion hit again, this time much closer. The entire facility seemed to collapse around them, debris falling from above, fire and smoke pouring into the hallways. The lights flickered, then went out entirely, plunging them into darkness. For a moment, everything was still. And then Marcus heard it, footsteps approaching, heavy and determined. But these weren't Solara's footsteps. "Get up!" a gruff voice shouted. It was a soldier, not human, but something far more terrifying. An enemy warrior. Marcus didn't hesitate. Using every last ounce of energy, he staggered to his feet, dragging Solara with him. She looked at him, surprised by his sudden movement, but before she could react, he pulled her into the shadowed corner. "What the hell are you doing?" Solara hissed, struggling against his grip. "Let go of me." Marcus didn't answer. He knew they had no choice but to work together if they were going to survive. The sounds of battle erupted outside, and a wave of heat washed over them. The fight was moving closer. With a final effort, Marcus shoved Solara out of the way of a blast, taking the brunt of the impact himself. He felt the world spin as pain coursed through his body, but his instincts kept him moving. They had to get out, together. There was no other choice. Solara, stunned by the sacrifice, looked at Marcus differently now. Her hatred wasn't gone, but something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she saw him as more than just a human. She saw him as an equal, a warrior. As they fought their way through the wreckage, Marcus realized something. Solara, the very alien princess who had once hated humans with all her heart, was now his reluctant ally. The game had changed, and they were no longer enemies. But where would this strange partnership lead? Only time would tell. And as they ran through the smoke and fire, side by side, the only thing that was certain was that the fight was far from over. Smoke hung thick in the air, its acrid stench seeping into their lungs as Marcus and Solara stumbled through the debris-filled hallway. The sounds of battle were all around them. Blasts from alien weapons, the roar of machinery, and the cries of soldiers clashing. Every step they took felt heavier, as if the weight of the whole world was on their shoulders. Solara had been quiet for a while, her usual haughty demeanor replaced with something darker. Her eyes were scanning the wreckage, constantly alert for any new threat. But there was something else too, a flicker of doubt in her expression. For the first time, Marcus saw her as more than just the cold, arrogant princess she had once been. She was now a fighter, her survival instincts kicking in as she moved with precision, each step calculated. Despite her skills, Marcus knew she was still an enemy. Her hatred for humanity had been clear from the start. She had no reason to help him. And if she could, she would have seen him dead by now. But something had changed, and it wasn't just the chaos of the battle. There was something about the way she fought alongside him, about the way she looked at him now. It was confusing. And as much as he wanted to trust her, Marcus couldn't forget who she was, or where they were. They'd reached an open area, an emergency escape tunnel that led to the outside world. Marcus was just about to make a run for it when a cold voice cut through the air, sending a chill down his spine. "You really think you can escape?" Solara's voice was laced with contempt. "You, a mere human, believe you can just walk out of here after what you've done?" Marcus froze, his hand resting on the cold metal of the escape hatch. He turned slowly, facing the princess who had once been his captor, now standing in front of him like a wall. Her eyes narrowed as she took a step closer, her hand resting on the hilt of the sword at her side. It wasn't just anger that he saw in her eyes. It was something darker, something more dangerous. "I don't need you to follow me," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm getting out of here, whether you like it or not." Solara scoffed, the sound harsh and mocking. "You think I'll just let you leave? You're in my domain now, human. You think you can leave without consequences." She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Marcus was ready to fight. He knew that even if he managed to escape, he wouldn't be able to do it alone. But what he didn't expect was the sudden shift in Solara's expression. The hard, cold look she had worn since their first encounter seemed to soften, just slightly, as she studied him. "You're not leaving," she said, her tone now more measured. "But I won't stop you either. You need me to survive this. And I need you." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He was confused. She had been ready to kill him not long ago, and now she was offering him an alliance of sorts. What had changed? Zalara's gaze flicked to the hatch behind him. You may be strong, human, but you can't outrun the enemy. They will track you down. If you want to survive, you'll need my help. Marcus shook his head, unwilling to show weakness. I don't need anyone's help. You do now, Zalara countered, her voice cold again, but with an edge of something like concern. You've seen what happened here. The enemy isn't just going to let you go. They'll hunt you, track you down. You'll never escape alone. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that he didn't need anyone, especially not her. But the look in her eyes told him something different. She wasn't just trying to manipulate him. She was trying to survive. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see him as more than just an enemy. Fine, Marcus muttered, his voice low. I'll take your help, but don't think this means we're allies. We're just surviving for now. Zalara gave a sharp nod, the hint of a smirk crossing her lips. I'll take that as a victory, human. The two of them turned toward the hatch, Marcus reluctantly accepting Zalara's assistance. He couldn't deny that he needed her help. Her knowledge of the facility and the alien technology would give them an edge, and without her, escaping would be next to impossible. But what troubled him the most was how quickly things had changed. The princess who had once been his enemy now seemed like the only person who could help him survive this madness. They made their way through the facility's corridors, dodging enemy patrols and navigating the increasingly dangerous terrain. Each step felt like a new challenge, and each moment spent with Zalara only seemed to raise more questions. Was this just a temporary truce, or was something else at play? Could he really trust her? Zalara, for her part, seemed focused on the task at hand. Her movements were precise, and she didn't speak much, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. But every now and then, Marcus caught a glimpse of something in her eyes, a flicker of something he couldn't quite place. Was it regret? Or something else? As they neared the outer perimeter of the facility, Zalara suddenly stopped. She turned to Marcus, her face hardening again. You'll be free soon. But remember, human, she said, her voice low. You owe me now. You will serve me. Marcus looked at her, confused by her words. Serve you? After all this? Zalara's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, there was no mistaking the intensity in her gaze. You will serve me, human. And when the time comes, you will fulfill your part of the bargain. Marcus didn't understand what she meant, but there was no time to argue. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, and he knew they had to move quickly. As they continued their journey, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what the future held. He had made a temporary ally in Zalara, but at what cost? And what did she mean by serving her? The answers to these questions would come in time. For now, all he could do was keep moving, keep fighting, and hope that, somehow, they would both make it out alive. But the journey ahead would be far from easy, and for Marcus it was only just beginning. The silence between Marcus and Zalara was thick with tension as they navigated through the darkened tunnels of the enemy base. The air was thick, and the smell of burning metal lingered, a stark reminder of the chaos that had unfolded only hours earlier. Neither of them spoke, but the weight of their strange alliance hung heavy in the air. Marcus was focused on the path ahead, each step a reminder of the danger they were still in. He couldn't help but glance at Zalara, every now and then. The princess, once his enemy, was now walking beside him as if they were teammates. Her sharp eyes scanned every corner, every shadow. But there was something different about her now. She wasn't just the arrogant alien princess he'd first met. There was a quiet understanding between them now, even if it was unspoken. Despite the uneasy truce between them, Marcus couldn't ignore the fact that Zalara had saved his life more than once. He had to admit that her skills in combat were impressive. She moved with purpose, her every action calculated and efficient, and when they had been ambushed earlier, it was Zalara who had acted without hesitation, pulling Marcus to safety and making sure he was protected. He had expected her to leave him behind, but she didn't. And that left him wondering, was there more to this princess than he had originally thought? Zalara, for her part, didn't seem to care much for Marcus's presence. She had made it clear that she would only help him for her own reasons, and Marcus was okay with that. He didn't need to trust her, he just needed her to get out alive. But there were moments, tiny moments, when their eyes met, and there was a flicker of something that Marcus couldn't place. Was it guilt? Regret? Or was it something else? Whatever it was, it made him uneasy. They reached an intersection in the tunnel, and Zalara immediately crouched low, her body tense. She motioned for Marcus to follow her, and he did without question. They both knew the enemy wasn't far behind, and they needed to stay quiet, stay hidden. Zalara signaled to a nearby hatch, and the two of them slipped through it, finding themselves in a small maintenance room. It was cramped, but it offered them the perfect cover. Once they were inside, Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned to Zalara, who was already studying the controls on the far wall. He couldn't help but ask, "Why are you helping me, Zalara? What's in it for you?" For a long moment, Zalara didn't answer. She continued to work on the controls, her fingers moving with precision, her eyes narrowed in concentration. It wasn't until the silence between them became unbearable that she finally spoke, her voice low and controlled. "You think I'm helping you because I want to," she said, her tone sharp. "You think I care about you, human. I don't. But if I want to survive, I need to make sure I'm not alone in this. You think you can make it on your own, but you can't. You'll die out there." Marcus frowned. He could tell that her words weren't meant to be comforting, but there was something in her voice that hinted at more than just pure hostility. Was she really just looking for an ally, or was there something deeper at play? Whatever it was, he didn't have time to figure it out. The enemy was closing in, and they needed to move quickly. "You don't have to trust me," Zalara continued, her voice steady. "But if you want to survive, you'll need to keep your distance and do exactly what I say." Marcus wasn't sure what to make of her words. She was strong, skilled, and intelligent, qualities that made her a valuable ally. But at the same time, he couldn't forget that she was an alien princess, someone who had once viewed humanity as beneath her. Why would someone like her want to help him, a lowly human soldier? Before he could ask another question, the hum of machinery echoed through the room. Zalara froze, her hand moving to the blaster at her side. The sound grew louder, and Marcus could feel his heart rate quicken. The enemy was close. Zalara held up a hand, signaling for Marcus to be quiet. She motioned for him to follow her as she moved swiftly toward the far corner of the room. The door creaked as it slid open, revealing a narrow corridor beyond. They slipped through, their movements precise, each step taken with care. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted, that the slightest sound could give away their position. They moved quickly through the facility, their path lit only by the faint glow of emergency lights. The tension between them was palpable, neither of them daring to speak. Every now and then, Zalara would glance at Marcus, her expression unreadable, but there was something in her eyes that made Marcus question everything he thought he knew about her. She wasn't the cold, ruthless princess who had once treated him like an insect. There was something else there, something more human. "Stay close," Zalara whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're almost there." Marcus nodded, his grip tightening around his weapon. He was ready for whatever came next. He had to be. They reached another door, this one reinforced with alien technology. Zalara wasted no time, her fingers moving over the control panel with expertise. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and they stepped into a darkened hallway. Ahead, they could hear voices, the sound of alien soldiers searching the area. Zalara motioned for Marcus to stay back. She moved silently, her body blending into the shadows, and Marcus followed her lead. It was clear that she was the better fighter, the better strategist, and he was starting to understand that, For all her arrogance, she had her reasons for doing what she did. She wasn't just an enemy. She was a survivor, just like him. As they moved deeper into the base, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what would happen once they got out. Zalara had saved his life more than once, but that didn't mean he trusted her. They were allies only because they needed each other. But something in the back of his mind told him that their relationship would change, that this unlikely alliance might turn into something neither of them could control. For now, though, all he could do was keep moving forward, follow Zalara's lead, and hope that somehow they would both make it out alive. The future was uncertain, but they had made it this far, and maybe, just maybe, they could survive the rest of the fight together. The tension between Marcus and Zalara had only grown since their uneasy alliance began. They had been through firefights, close calls, and moments where they almost lost everything. But now, in the quiet of their hidden refuge, something had shifted. It was no longer just survival. There was something more between them, something neither of them could ignore. Zalara sat by the edge of the makeshift campfire they had set up in a deserted room deep within the enemy base. The glow of the fire cast flickering shadows across her face, making her seem almost distant, like she belonged to another world. And maybe she did. She was an alien princess, trained to command armies, destined to rule. Yet here she was, sitting beside a human soldier who was still trying to understand what had drawn them together. Marcus, weary from the long journey, leaned against the cold stone wall, his eyes on Zalara. He had seen her fight, seen her risk everything for his survival, and part of him was still trying to process what that meant. She was the enemy, yet she had become his only ally in a world where everyone else seemed to have turned their backs on him. "You know," Marcus began, his voice rough from exhaustion, "I never thought I'd be in this position. Saving you, trusting you." Zalara didn't look at him. She simply stared into the fire, her expression unreadable. She hadn't spoken much since they'd escaped the last wave of enemy soldiers, but Marcus knew her well enough to recognize when she was troubled. There was a storm behind her eyes, a war raging within her, and Marcus couldn't help but wonder if it was the same one that was beginning to rage inside him. "Why do you keep saving me?" Marcus asked, unable to stop himself. "You don't owe me anything. You hate humans." For the briefest moment, Zalara's eyes flickered with something that looked like pain. She quickly masked it, but Marcus had seen it. It was as if the question had struck too close to something deep inside her, something she wasn't ready to face. "I'm not saving you because I care about you," she said, her voice cool, but with an edge of something softer beneath it. "I'm saving myself. I can't let them get me. And if that means using you to get out alive, then so be it." Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat. He knew she wasn't lying, but he also knew there was more to her words than she was letting on. Zalara wasn't just an alien princess trying to survive. She was someone who had been thrust into a world of chaos, someone who had to make impossible decisions. And as much as she tried to hide it, Marcus could see the cracks in her armor. There was a long silence between them. The fire crackled, and the room seemed to close in around them, the darkness pressing against the walls. Marcus found himself leaning forward, his heart pounding in his chest. What had begun as a mutual need for survival had somehow turned into something else. Something dangerous. Zalara stood abruptly, her sharp eyes scanning the room as if expecting an attack. But after a moment, she relaxed, letting her shoulders drop. "I don't want to talk about this anymore," she muttered, turning her back on him. "We have a mission. We're not done yet." Marcus stood as well, his instincts telling him to push the conversation further. But he knew better. If there was one thing he had learned about Zalara, it was that she wasn't someone who opened up easily. He couldn't force her to talk, no matter how much he wanted to understand what was going on in her mind. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll focus on the mission." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that the mission was no longer their only focus. They were connected now, more than just allies in war. There was something deeper, something that neither of them had the words for. It was a bond forged in the fires of conflict, a bond that neither of them could deny, even though it was forbidden. Over the next few days, their journey took them further into enemy territory, and the danger escalated. They encountered more resistance, more traps, and even more close calls. But through it all, something had changed between them. They fought side by side, their movements in sync, their trust in each other growing. It wasn't just a partnership. It was something more, something that neither of them could ignore. At night, when the fighting stopped and they found a moment of peace, they would sit together. Marcus would ask her about her life, about her people, and Zalara would share bits and pieces, though always carefully guarded. She would never speak of her past in full, but Marcus could tell there was a story there, one that had shaped her into the person she was. Zalara, for her part, never spoke of love. She never mentioned what her heart might want, if anything at all. But Marcus could see it in the way her eyes lingered on him sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking. He saw it in the quiet moments, when their hands brushed, when their gazes met and held. It wasn't love in the traditional sense, but there was something there. A forbidden connection that neither of them could name, but both of them felt. And yet, even as they grew closer, they both knew that their bond was dangerous. Zalara was a princess, a leader, and Marcus was a soldier, a human, a being that her kind had once viewed as nothing more than a nuisance. For her, this connection with him was a betrayal of everything she had been taught to believe. And for him, the attraction he felt for her was something he could never act on, no matter how strong it was. As they moved forward in their mission, the reality of their situation weighed heavily on both of them. They were two people from entirely different worlds, brought together by circumstance, bound by necessity. But what they felt for each other could never be more than that, could it? The questions lingered, unanswered, as they continued their journey through the darkness, the weight of their forbidden love hanging between them like a ghost they couldn't escape. The wind howled as Marcus and Zalara stood at the edge of the battlefield, the cold air biting into their skin. They had reached the final stretch of their mission, the point where their survival meant more than just getting through. It was a fight not just for their lives, but for the future of both their people. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The enemy's forces had regrouped, and their strength was overwhelming. Marcus could feel the weight of it pressing on him. Each step toward the battlefield felt heavier, like the ground itself was trying to drag him down. Yet beside him, Zalara stood tall, her posture stiff with determination, her alien eyes scanning the horizon. She had once led armies, commanding legions of soldiers to victory. But now she was fighting for something entirely different. She was fighting for them, for the future they could never have imagined, but now couldn't escape. As they approached the front lines, the first blasts of enemy fire shattered the silence of the desolate landscape. The ground shook with the force of explosions, and Marcus instinctively reached for his weapon, his heart pounding in his chest. They had made it this far together, but they both knew this fight would be the ultimate test. Zalara turned to him, her voice calm but laced with urgency. "We need to reach their command center. That's where we can end this." Marcus nodded, knowing what she meant. The command center was the heart of the enemy's operation. Destroying it would cripple their ability to coordinate, giving them a chance at victory. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about ensuring the safety of their people, both human and alien. "Stay close," Marcus said, his voice low and filled with the kind of authority that only came from facing death countless times. Zalara didn't respond with words, but her eyes spoke volumes. They were in this together, and nothing was going to change that. The bond they had formed over the past weeks had only grown stronger, even in the face of unimaginable danger. They were more than just allies now. They were something deeper, but even with that connection, they both knew that the battle ahead would be their hardest yet. As they entered the enemy's perimeter, the chaos of war erupted around them. Alien soldiers, humanoid and mechanical, clashed with the human rebels who had joined their cause. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and ozone, the screech of weapons slicing through the air. Marcus and Zalara moved as one, their synchronized movements a testament to the trust they had built in each other. With every step, the battle grew fiercer. They fought through wave after wave of enemy soldiers, pushing forward with relentless determination. Zalara's skills were unmatched, her grace and precision cutting through the ranks of the enemy like a blade. She moved with the fluidity of a predator, each strike calculated, each movement perfect. And yet Marcus could see the toll it was taking on her. The strain of constant fighting, the weight of the decisions she had made, was beginning to show in her eyes. They reached the heart of the enemy's stronghold, the command center looming ahead. It was a fortress, a towering structure of metal and energy, guarded by a maze of automated defenses. Marcus knew this would be the true test of their resolve. They had to destroy the core, but getting close enough to do so was almost impossible. Zalara's hand touched his arm, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she looked at him, not as a soldier, not as an ally, but as someone who understood the weight of everything they had been through. "This is it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "If we fail here, there's no turning back." Marcus's grip tightened on his weapon, and he nodded. "We won't fail." Together, they charged forward, taking down enemy forces one by one. The closer they got to the command center, the heavier the resistance became. But they were unstoppable. Their combined strength, their shared determination, pushed them through the seemingly impenetrable defenses. When they finally reached the core, they found themselves surrounded by an army of soldiers, each one determined to stop them. The fight was brutal, and for a moment, Marcus thought they might not make it. But just as all hope seemed lost, Zalara unleashed her full power. With a swift motion, she destroyed the last line of defense, leaving the core unprotected. Marcus moved quickly, planting the explosive charges with precision, his heart racing as the countdown began. The enemy was closing in, but they had no time to waste. Every second counted. "Get back," Marcus shouted, grabbing Zalara's arm and pulling her away from the core. They ran, the explosions from the charges echoing behind them, the ground shaking with the force of the blast. As they reached a safe distance, they looked back at the command center. The once imposing structure was now nothing more than a smoldering ruin. The enemy's forces began to scatter, their coordination falling apart as the command center went dark. Marcus felt a sense of victory wash over him, but it was fleeting. The battle wasn't over yet. There was still much to do. But for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of the success they had just achieved. Zalara stood beside him, her face tired but filled with a fierce pride. "We did it," she said, her voice softer than it had been before. Marcus looked at her, his eyes filled with something more than just gratitude. It was something deeper, something unspoken. The bond between them had been forged in fire, and now it was unbreakable. But even as the war raged on around them, they knew that their future was uncertain. There would be more battles, more challenges ahead. But no matter what happened, they had won this fight together. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The dust of the battlefield had barely settled when Marcus and Zalara stood amidst the ruins, gazing at the horizon. The war was far from over, but the victory they had achieved felt like the first rays of a new dawn. They had defeated the enemy's command center, crippling their forces. The once feared machine of war now stumbled and fell apart, its intricate system of control disrupted. But the destruction was not without its cost. The death toll had been high, and the toll on their bodies and spirits was undeniable. As they stood there, breathing in the aftermath, the realization of how far they had come settled in. Zalara, the fierce alien princess who had once seen humanity as weak and insignificant, now stood by Marcus's side, her trust in him unshakable, her alien beauty, once so alien and cold, was now softened by the bond they shared. Their eyes met, and in that instant, words were unnecessary. The journey that had begun with conflict, mistrust, and hatred had transformed into something much deeper. "What now?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse from the battle, his body sore from the relentless fighting. Zalara's gaze shifted to the horizon, where the first light of dawn was breaking over the ruined landscape. "Now, we rebuild," she said quietly. "The war may be over, but the scars it left behind are not so easily healed." She spoke of more than just the physical damage to the world around them. There were emotional scars, too, scars that would take time to mend. The people they had fought for, both human and alien, would need to find a way to coexist in the aftermath of the violence. The deep divisions that had once torn them apart would not vanish overnight. But as the sun rose, a flicker of hope emerged in their hearts, a reminder that the future could be shaped differently if they chose to make it so. As the two of them stood side by side, the reality of their situation hit them both. They were no longer just soldiers in a war. They were leaders now, tasked with the responsibility of guiding their people to a new future. But it wasn't just the people who needed guidance, it was them too. Both Marcus and Zalara had changed in ways they hadn't fully realized until this moment. Their bond, forged in the heat of battle, was no longer just one of necessity. It had grown into something far more powerful: love. Zalara turned to him, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "We've seen how far hatred can take us. Now we must learn how to trust each other. We must show the others that the future can be different." Marcus nodded. The weight of her words settled on him, and he felt the weight of their shared responsibility. But there was something else, too. It was the unspoken understanding between them that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The war had been brutal, but it had brought them closer. And now, it seemed as though they had both found something they had been searching for all along. A reason to fight for a future that was not just about survival, but about something more, something beautiful. A few days passed as they tended to their wounded and began the arduous task of rebuilding. The once destroyed world started to show signs of recovery. Marcus worked tirelessly alongside the people he had fought beside, offering guidance and support where he could. Zalara, too, found herself in a new role, one that she had never expected to take on. As a leader, she had always been ruthless, but now, as a symbol of unity between humans and aliens, she found herself growing into a softer, more compassionate version of herself. The people, both human and alien, had watched their leaders fight together on the front lines. The shared struggle had brought them together in ways that words never could. Now, as they began the process of rebuilding their world, they looked to Marcus and Zalara for direction. It was a delicate process, one filled with tension and uncertainty, but it was a process that was slowly beginning to take shape. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Marcus and Zalara sat together on a hill overlooking the camp. The stars were just beginning to twinkle in the sky, and the soft hum of activity in the camp below seemed far away, like a distant memory. "We've come so far," Marcus said, his voice filled with awe as he looked at Zalara. She sat beside him, her hand resting gently on her stomach, an action that had become second nature to her in recent weeks. She was carrying their child, a symbol of their victory and of their shared future. It had been a surprise to both of them, the way their relationship had blossomed. And yet, in some strange way, it felt like it was always meant to be. Zalara glanced at him, her eyes warm with affection. "Yes, we have. And it's not over yet. The world is still broken, but together, we can fix it." Her words were a promise, one that both of them knew they would keep. The future was uncertain, but they had each other now, and that was enough. Over the next few months, the world began to heal. The cooperation between humans and aliens was still fragile, but it was a start. And as Zalara's belly grew, so did their hope for the future. They would raise their child in a world that, though scarred, held the potential for something better. The bond between Marcus and Solara, once built on necessity and mutual respect, had transformed into something deeper, love. And in that love, they found strength. The war had tested them both, but it had also given them something invaluable, a shared dream of a new beginning, of a world where humans and aliens could coexist, side by side, without the shadow of hatred and mistrust. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Marcus and Solara stood together, watching their world rebuild itself from the ashes. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because together, they had already proven that they could overcome anything. And with the dawn of a new day, they knew that their journey was just beginning.